Hi, welcome everyone. It's nice to see you all there. I'm gonna um, share my screen and talk a little bit about the topic for tonight. All right, so last time, of course, we talked about avoiding evil, and tonight we're going to focus on cultivating good. And it means a lot more than just doing good things in the world, as I'm sure you're well aware. It's about really embracing the good life, embracing a life that is in accordance with Dhamma, so that we can really develop our mind and our skillful actions, our skillful speech. And this is a little snippet from Majjhima Nikaya 46, which talks about 4 ways of undertaking things. But the part that I felt like was really appropriate, just as a quote to begin with, is the Buddha contrasting the untaught ordinary person, the person who hasn't heard the Dhamma, doesn't have that kind of knowledge and that guidance for their life. It says, it starts out with one who hasn't seen enlightened beings or noble ones or people practicing, and they don't know what practices they should cultivate and foster and which practices they shouldn't cultivate and foster. But the educated, noble disciple, so the Buddha contrasts the uneducated ordinary person with the noble disciple in a lot of places in the suttas, in his teachings. And he says they cultivate and foster practices that they should, and they don't cultivate and foster practices that they shouldn't. And when they do so, unlikable, undesirable, and disagreeable things decrease, and likable, desirable, and agreeable things increase. And this is something that I'm gonna invite you to reflect on later. And I know when I think about my own life, I can really see how before I met up with the Dhamma, even though I was trying very hard to develop myself, live a good life, be a good person, there was a lot of uncertainty, mixed messages, to know what is good to cultivate and what isn't. And it's really the Dhamma, that the Buddha's teachings, that have helped me get clear about that. And so I'm just starting here, the importance of really being able to hear the Dhamma, how lucky we all are that that's been the case. And then these 2 readings that I asked you to read first, we'll talk about the Sagalika Sutta a little bit. And I just highlighted a couple pieces. If you had a chance to read the sutta, it's in the long discourses, the Digha Nikaya. And it's, I think, a very sweet interaction. If you've read it, you know this young man is up early in the morning, having gotten all wet, his hair's all wet. He's prostrating to the 4 directions, and maybe it's the 6th direction. I guess it's the 6 directions. And when the Buddha asks him about it, he says it's because his father on his deathbed said that he should do this, and so he's doing it. So, it's like so many things in our life, I think, that we may be doing without knowing why, or we are not really clear about what the results are. And so, of course, the Buddha gives him some guidance around this, and you can really kind of see that he's speaking, of course, remembering that he's speaking to a young man about how to live life and what to be careful of. So, of course, the first part is very much about what we were covering last time, avoiding the pitfalls and the unskillful things. And then I pulled out, just in reflecting on the parts where the Buddha is saying, if you live your life this way, if you gather friends that are really good friends, and he divided them into 4 types: the helper, the friend in good times and bad, the counselor, or the one who guides you towards good things and helps you develop in a good way, and the one who's compassionate. Now, this is the translation that I had given you links for, the one to Sutta Central and Bhante Sujato's translation. The translation of Maurice Walsh is also interesting. It's helpful to kind of see both. It might be nice sometime if you have a chance to look at that one, published by Wisdom Publishing, because they use different language and it gives you an even a fuller sense, I think, of what the Buddha was trying to say in the Pali. And to really think about what it means to have a good friend, to have good friends, friends that are the same with us, whether we're going through good times or bad times, someone who really wants to help you, someone who's really interested in our well-being, someone who's really, takes good care of us when we aren't able to take care of ourselves, those kinds of things. Did anyone, and then, so I wanted to shine a little light on that, and also shine a little light on when the Buddha talks about the 6 directions. And of course, some of the descriptions of the way parents, the sort of encouragement of how, as a parent, we would treat our children and how children would treat their parents. How teachers, we would have this relationship with our teachers and how we would support each other and partners, and our children, our friends and colleagues, our workers, anyone who works for us, whether we're managing in a company, they're not really our employees, but we are, making decisions that affect them, and spiritual teachers. And, I wrote in sustaining relationships because these are all extremely important relationships in our life. And when I take this as a whole, and I think about these descriptions, even though some of them might feel pretty antiquated, and maybe not the things that we would value, for instance, with our partners, and we may have very different values now, or just because we have more freedom, I think, beyond our social mores sometimes. But when we think about the purpose or the thought behind it, how do we really cherish each other? And how do we really support each other? And how are we really solid and sincere and kind to each other? Even though in these close relationships, there are often a lot of things that are really difficult and hard to work through. And how do we do that? These are really where the cultivation of good, is kind of like where the rubber meets the road. This is the day-to-day stuff that we really can cultivate to make a huge difference in our lives. And the flip side of it, like with friends, to really pay attention to how much time, effort, influence we are under around people who really aren't good friends. The Buddha says, the translation is sometimes fake friends, the ones who really aren't interested in giving back to us or sharing fairly, being really in a real cooperative friendship where everyone benefits, or the other kinds of things that we read in there, ones who are, totally self-focused. And of course, there can be a lot of different reasons to spend time with people. Sometimes we're in a relationship, a family relationship, or for some other reason, we're doing it to support someone else. But then to not be confused about the kind of relationship it is. And it doesn't mean condemning others, but really being clear, about who you spend your time with. So we had a situation recently with, someone who was in business and he wanted to help a couple of people and he got them involved in his work. And then he found out that they were suffering from addiction problems. They weren't being reliable. They weren't following through on promises, and they were really taking money from him. And, he's talking to us about it. And I think the impression I sometimes can have is, well, wouldn't Buddhist nuns be just endlessly forgiving and compassionate and try to help everyone? And the truth is, the Buddha was pretty clear that, there's only so much you can do. You have to be conscientious about that. And that it's not all right to kind of open the way for people to be dishonest and take advantage and be irresponsible. And, he said a lot of things about just staying away from people who are, in terms of friendship, it's different if there's an avenue for really giving them some kind of support that they need. But we have to be careful we're not just facilitating bad behavior. I remember one of the times early on when I was exposed to the Dhamma, and I was spending time in monasteries in Thailand. The abbot was away. This was in the international monastery at Ajahn Chah's, and the abbot was away, and then he came back. They had some builders working on making a new kitchen for the monastery. And he said, he's British, he said, we're going to have to sack the builder. And I thought, whoa, a monk is going to fire the guy. It felt so unkind, and yeah, of course he was not doing the job, so it's something that I had to get realistic about. And it's not just being realistic, it's the bringing together of wisdom along with compassion. And so we have to conclude ourselves in the relationship factor, that we are not putting ourselves in harm's way, that we're not allowing this kind of to, being taken advantage of, but we're also still, working with compassion. All right, so I'm going to move on here to Majjhima Nikaya 8, effacement. Now, this is a sutta I love and have used myself a lot. And I know that sometimes reading it without having any kind of explanation can be a little bit hard to understand, maybe. And as I've noted here, there are really 5 sections. I mean, there's the first section where the Buddha is talking about when people are practicing meditation and they have jhanas and they think, oh, I'm practicing effacement. And the Buddha said, no, that's not how you practice effacement. Now, effacement here, the way I take it, is a kind of erasing or rubbing away of defilements. But you're really rubbing away those unskillful qualities and you're cultivating good qualities in their place. And sometimes when we have great meditation, we think that our defilements are deteriorating, or we're maybe we think we're much more advanced. And then many stories from practitioners, monastics, and probably anyone, you're off on your own and you have solitude and you're meditating and it's all great, and then you come home or you get back to the monastery and there are all kinds of people around and they're making noise and you're just unhappy, irritated with them, and you realize you're not quite as fully free as you thought. And the Buddha, I think probably there were definitely some mendicants in the group who thought they were further along than they were, and really kind of maybe a little puffed up about that. And the Buddha wanted to let them know that there is a way to work with our tendencies that are unskillful and our patterns that are unskillful, but it's not going to happen. Meditation, of course, helps. This is not a, um, talk on not meditating, because the Buddha was very clear that it's important to be meditating and it helps us, but it doesn't do the whole job. And so he gives these different steps. And the first one is just identifying these ways of practicing effacement based on 44 different kinds of, what do you want to call them? Qualities, tendencies. I mean, he's got the Noble Eightfold Path in there, and, these different elements, or however we want to describe these. And I always really like the very first one, others will be cruel, but here we will not be cruel. And just that one alone, I feel like, yeah, if we all lived according to that, and every place where we would go, the community around it would be committed to that, we'd have some real benefits from it. And of course, he goes through the other 43 things as well. And, each one we can look at and we can ask ourselves, do I have this tendency? Do I have this tendency towards irritability or envy? Could I stand doing some reflection and work on, speech, right speech, meaning, truthful, not malicious, not divisive, not frivolous. That's always an important one for everyone. But it goes through those precepts, but it also goes through many other characteristics or qualities of our mind and our attitudes and our patterns. And working with something like anger, working with something like irritability, working with something like being arrogant, self-centered. These are really valuable things to recognize. We can see that, even if it's kind of subtle, it's a way that we can really be held back. And so we start with just that identification of these 44, and there could be any number more that we might identify. And you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm missing a little context here. So I haven't heard the word effacement before. So that's part of my first question. And you gave a brief comment about that, rubbing away the defilements. And then we have 4 categories here. Are those 4 of the 44, or are those?
No. Okay, so thank you for the question. So effacement, can you hear me better now? Maybe, I don't know if you had trouble hearing before. I hope you.
No, I didn't have trouble hearing. I'm just have trouble understanding.
Yeah, I was just kind of asking everybody because I had forgotten. I had the microphone way over there somewhere, and
Okay.
I just wanted to. Thank you. So, no. So okay. So the title, effacement. The word in Pali is saleka, and Bhikkhu Bodhi actually was probably Venerable Nyanamoli, translated it as effacement. And Bhante Sujato translates it as self-effacement. And personally, I like effacement better because this isn't, I mean, in a way, it does get to dissolving the sense of self, but it also is just, can be just kind of dissolving or rubbing away the defilements. So when you efface something, like you're effacing a statue, you're kind of like destroying the features. And it's like, this is really, you're effacing these qualities that are unwholesome, or these patterns. These are things that are deeply, deeply kind of ingrained in our minds, this is sankhara that can be very, very, you know, well practiced, you might say, and deep grooves in our minds, our habits. And then each of these that I have listed here, we've got the 44 ways to practice effacement. And then, so the Buddha has these 5, he goes through this same list 5 times. He has these 44 items that he lists, and then he goes through it again as the inclination. So when the mind inclines, it gives rise to this thought, others will be cruel, but here we will not be cruel. So he lists it in the first 40, he lists the 44. And then the next section is the inclination of mind. This is the Sutta Effacement, number 8 in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle length discourses. And this first section is about the Buddha being approached by a teacher who's asking a question on behalf of, he sees his students needing this guidance. And the Buddha talks about, no matter how many attainments in meditation you have, you're not really practicing effacement. So we'll scroll down here, and this is how you practice effacement. And he goes through this list. So you think about how these are things, others kill living beings, but here we won't do that. And he goes through this whole list of 44, being uncelibate, speaking falsely, speaking maliciously and harshly, gossiping, being covetous, having ill will, wrong view, wrong intention, wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, wrong effort, wrong mindfulness, wrong concentration, wrong knowledge. So this goes beyond the Noble Eightfold Path, wrong deliverance. So these are, you're not really, you don't really have the knowledge of enlightenment yet. You don't really have deliverance, freedom from yet, but you may think you have. But then you really are working at being clear and honest about what's actually true with yourself, and you're practicing for those things. Then he goes through the 5 hindrances. He brings in some more qualities: anger, resentment, being contemptuous and insolent, envious and avaricious, fraudulent, deceitful, obstinate and arrogant, difficult to admonish, hanging out with bad friends. We're not going to do that here. We're going to have good friends, and choosing people who are healthy for us, really good. Being negligent, faithless, shameless, no fear of wrongdoing, little learning, being lazy, unmindful, lacking wisdom, holding tightly to our own views tenaciously, and relinquishing them with difficulty. But that we're not going to do that here. Okay, so those are the 44. And then the next section covers the same 44, but he says this is the inclination of the mind. So when we want to work with this kind of thing, first, it's not enough to just know kind of a list, but you really incline your mind towards this and you reflect upon it. And so he goes through all 44 again. And then the next step is, seeing what I'm inclined towards. So a person given to cruelty has non-cruelty by which to avoid it. So this avoidance, or finding the way around, and the similes helpful, I think. If there's a path that's uneven and there's another path that's smooth, you take the smooth path. Or if there's a place to cross a river or a road, and it's very difficult there, it's maybe again uneven or treacherous in some way, but there's another place that you can go that's really safe and easy to walk over. Then you use that. And so this is the Buddhist method for how we change these things in ourself. And it sounds so simple. It's like, well, what does it mean to use non-cruelty to avoid cruelty? So that kind of, what does that mean? How does that work? So if a person has the habit of, killing living beings or being cruel in some other way, then every time they stop themselves and every time they don't do it, it helps them overcome that tendency. And I imagine you've experienced this in your own life. So the first time I lived in a monastery, it was the first time I was around people who didn't kill, insects. And, it was a common practice for me to swat mosquitoes if they sat on your arm, or that was what I was trained to do, you might say, taught. And then to stop myself and just like gently shoo them away or blow on them so they leave, or just let them bite you. This is a way to start to let go of that habit that feels automatic to slap them, to take life. And then it starts to have another kind of impact on the heart and on the mind, where you start to feel more gentle and kind. You have some more compassion developing for other living beings. So he goes through the whole list again. And it's usually the opposite thing, like non-cruelty. So it's interesting, like in the Pali, you'll have a word and then the opposite, you just add an A on the front of it. So there's cruelty and then not cruelty. The A negates it. And so you'll have a lot of these things, it's like, and to think about non-cruelty, it's different from kindness or compassion. It's actually just the absence of cruelty. Like you can have more neutral feelings and there's still the absence of cruelty. And you're not doing that thing that's cruel. And you're no longer thinking in that way either. So this is purifying our conduct, but it's also purifying our mind, which we'll talk more about next time. So if the person has the urge, who's declared that they're celibate, to do things that are not in the spirit of celibacy, it doesn't even have to mean that they have sex. But the Buddha even said, if you're celibate, if you're a man and you're celibate, and you're standing by a wall and you're listening to women talking or singing on the other side of the wall, you're not practicing celibacy. You're still like looking for that kind of interaction or that kind of sensual input. And so even something like that, to really work with purifying one's mental and physical conduct. And so just noticing any of these things that we have, and then of course abstaining from harsh speech, abstaining from gossip. Usually it's just like non-ill will instead of ill will, right view instead of wrong view, and on like that. But you can also, when we practice with this kind of thing, really see what it takes. What do I need to employ to be able to avoid this behavior? Yes, Terry.
Yes, thank you. Number 20.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if you can elaborate on the translation using the word deliverance.
Yeah, I think I didn't go. I'm not going to go. Let's see if Bhante Sujato, what he's got. We don't have numbers here, but I think we can find out where it is. Right freedom he uses. I think it's probably Vimutti. And so these two kind of added on to the Noble Eightfold Path. So he uses immersion for concentration. So there's our, the eighth. This is the whole list of what's in. Actually, it's this is the whole list of what's in the Noble Eightfold Path. And then sometimes in the suttas, this idea of knowledge and freedom, or knowledge and deliverance. It's really like there's the knowing, that kind of stands for the knowing that this knowing the way things actually are, realizing that. And there can be some other steps sometimes in between, but then freedom from the defilements. Even if it's a temporary freedom, it may not be the realization of nirvana fully, but there is a freedom from some level of being caught up in the world. I think it's probably Vimutti. So here, I don't know if you're used to using Sutta Central, but we can change the view, look at the Pali. We can look at it line by line. And then I have to go back and find the area of text where I was looking, because it'll be further down. And let's see what the Pali word is. Harshly, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, etc. The freedom, sama vimutti. So vimutti, released, emancipated. And you can, so I clicked on it. I have it set so that the glossary will pop up, the English translation. And then I can click on vimutti, and I can see what the concise Pali English dictionary says: released, emancipated. And vimutta is freed, released, intellectually emancipated. So this isn't like the realization of nibbana, like I said, but it's a level of freedom from suffering, from being caught up in wrong view, perhaps. So vimutti can be associated with other words like citta vimutti. It's an emancipated heart. Panya vimutti, emancipated by insight, freed by reason. You can really do some great studying using Sutta Central. Any questions? Did that answer your question, Terry? Okay, great. Yes, Shauna?
I don't know if I have a question, but this, I have a comment. I don't know much about this, but I remember reading about the antidotes to anger and other hindrances, and this seems to be kind of another way of approaching that.
Yep.
So I that's all I wanted to say. So
yeah, and it's a good observation, and we do see that the Buddha taught so many different ways to approach things, and that it's so valuable because we might be in a different place at a different, something might hit us at some point that really is helpful, or this is a really simple method, right? So it's and it does go farther. I'm gonna change our setting here if I can. Let me see. I may have to scroll all the way back up. Go back to plain text so we can read better. Back, let's see, we've got contents here we can use. So we've talked about the first part about listing the 44 things and then giving the rising of the thought about it, really the inclination of the mind, and then the way around it. So using the opposite, abstaining from doing this thing, maybe using the opposite approach. And then we're going to go to this part called going up, where you're heading upwards because of this work to hold ourselves back from doing things that, are cruel, say, or killing living beings or whatever it is. The very last one, where instead of being attached to our own views and holding them tight and refusing to let them go, we, really let go. We're not attached to them and we don't hold them tight and we let them go easily. And by doing that, it leads us upwards. So he says the unskillful qualities lead us downwards. The skillful qualities lead us upwards. And this kind of way of thinking about things, is this thing that I'm doing, is this thing that I'm contemplating doing or saying or giving, energy to, thought to, is this leading upwards or is this leading downwards? What's the result likely to be? This is helpful. This is actually really close to the Pali idea of appamada. Appamada is heedfulness, or real care in what we're undertaking, what we're doing, and it includes a kind of an anticipation or a reflection on where is this going to go? How's this going to end up? And a lot of times especially if we find ourselves in a situation where we're really swept up in the moment, or some kind of exhilaration or some kind of strong feeling, we don't think about it. Where's this going to end up? Is anybody going to get hurt? Including yourself. And so that's like having this sense that there is this upwards or downwards motion in the trajectory we are taking. And certainly karmically, this really is true. And so when we're doing this practice, like if we are really attached to our views, for example, and we get into arguments with people who have different ways of seeing things, like really thinking, well, where does this lead? Does this really lead to any resolution, or is this just causing bad feelings? Is this really helping anyone see more clearly? And so, really working with our own attachments. And so this has this upward motion. And then lo and behold, the fifth level, or the fifth pass, you might say, is really this tendency really going away. Like the rubbing away is really complete. Like you're erasing something. How when you've got a strong pencil mark, you have to work at it and it's still there, kind of gray, and then you work at it some more and finally it's gone. And the Buddha does warn here that if we're sinking in the mud ourselves, we can't really pull someone else out. So we really want to completely erase this tendency, and then we can really help someone else from a position of really knowing for sure ourselves. So in this same way, we become completely free of these tendencies. And I gotta say, I had read this sutta a number of times, and one time I read it again, and I really recognized one of the qualities in my life. And it was when I was taking care of my mom, and she was older, and that relationship had always been challenging for me, and I had been really working on it. But I noticed that I was carrying resentment. And it was, I didn't realize that that's what it was until I was reading the sutta and I was going through these things and looking for, where do I have this in my own life, in my own mind? Do I have any of this, any subtle, vestiges of any of these 44 things? And of course, with some of them, there's more work that can be done, right view, right, right immersion, right concentration. But it was interesting when I got to resentment, and I realized that that's what was really lying underneath some of my irritability with my mother. A feeling and a attitude, and sometimes it would, show up in my tone of voice or whatever, that I did not want. I did not want to say things that were hurtful. And she knew me so well. She knew if I was, even a little negative, but I didn't want that. And then seeing that it was resentment, and being able to kind of bring it more to the surface for myself, I could really work through these steps. Really, really seeing when it arises, how to avoid any kind of action on it, and then eventually noticing that it's gone. And it's really inspiring to notice that we really can work with our own tendencies to the point that they disappear, these things, and there's something beautiful in their place. So this is really the sutta and how it works. Any comments or questions at the moment? If not, I think maybe this is a good time for some meditation. And maybe afterwards we can have more discussion. I think our group is fairly small today, so I'm thinking we don't break up into small groups. We just maybe have a conversation as a big group. And I'll just, we might delve into a few questions about this whole idea of cultivating good. So let's find a comfortable position. It's a lot of words and hopefully some helpful ideas. Breathing in and letting the breath move through your whole body, if that makes sense. We're taking in the air and it's going into our lungs, but it also has that breath energy that can really flow through our entire being. And it's the time of day when it might feel like you want to nod off a bit, but we want to also bring in some energy that helps us to stay alert. Relaxed and alert. Such an interesting combination. Mindfulness is established and present. We let go of tension in our physical body to the degree that we can, and let go of mental tension in our minds. One way to cultivate good, of course, is by developing the Brahma Viharas. As we let ourselves relax and let go of whatever has been happening today, we can also invite in a feeling of warmth and kindness. Buddha suggested that we fill our whole body, our being with that kindness, with that metta. 1/4 at a time, however that makes sense. I tend to think of that myself as being in a kind of cylinder or having this kind of area around me, starting at my center core of kind of vertical kind of pole in the middle. And from that 1/4, what is it like to think of that filling with this energy of loving kindness? Maybe it's a very odd concept for you. But however you evoke it, that there is this softness, this tenderness. And then filling the next 1/4, I go to my right side. This whole 1/4 of the cylindrical pie. And 1/4 at the back. And to my left side. So really filling up my whole being and the area all around it with this kind of beautiful, kind energy, unconditional love. It's unconditional. It's not sort of aimed at anything or connected to anything. There's nothing to expect from it. Nothing that needs to limit it. And then also imagining it above us and below us. And a sweet orb of kindness. And we have our mind immersed in metta. Then there's all kinds of things that it's not engaged in. Leaving aside all other qualities. a beautiful, contented, pleasant experience of metta. Now, of course, we can have this metta related to other living beings. But as we expand out to any of them, we want to do it with that same lack of conditions. Equally for all beings, the way the sun shines equally on everyone, good or bad, large or small, young or old, whatever. I think there is a lot more forgiveness in the Dhamma than we recognize. There's a lot more kindness. In this world, in this universe, in the world systems, then sometimes we realize. That's what I think. So when we create this kind of goodness in ourselves, I think we're aligning more fully with the Dhamma. So now I'm going to bring the meditation time to an end. I don't have a bell here with me tonight, but we can begin to prepare ourselves to come back and open our eyes. Thank you. And I have a couple of questions for you. I'm going to go back to the slides. I was going to invite people to talk about this in small groups, and you can let me know later if that would have been your preference or not. It really varies among people. Sometimes you start to divide into small groups, and a quarter of the people just decide to leave because they don't really feel like talking. So you could let me know. I'd be happy to take that into account for next time. But in case you find it useful, be happy to hear about anything you practiced this past month on not doing unskillful things and what the results were. Or the second one here, what are some of the positive changes you've experienced since you picked up the Dhamma as a practice? And this is something I think is really valuable to reflect on from time to time, seeing how different we've become, maybe even in small things. So if you have any stories about that, I'd love to hear them. And then the third one is, what challenges you expect to face if you go deeper into cultivating the good? I shouldn't say if, as you go deeper into cultivating the good. So, any comments? Sharing? Yes, Terry.
I'll speak to the first question.
Okay.
So what did you practice this last month in the results? Well, I spent more effort, and I've been doing this for a while, but I spent more effort practicing not bringing my ego along with me when I was driving my car. Oh my God. Because that's where my ego wants to hang out.
Mm.
And it was great. It was great. Sometimes it wasn't very challenging, and sometimes it was. So that was very nice.
Mm. Would you mind telling me if there was anything you did exactly? Like,
Yes. So while driving my car, if I noticed I started to generate a story about the other driver or drivers, right, then I realized, oh, and are the stories ever nice? Do they engage in right thought, right speech, that kind of thing in my mind? No, they never do. So I thought, oh, that's not going to work out, because what's going to happen is it's going to lead me as a practitioner into thinking in ways about these other drivers that are not positive. And my thoughts can lead me to actions, and I don't want to do that. So I would catch myself starting to create a story, a narrative about this other driver, whatever it is. And I would say to myself, I don't really know anything, do I? I don't know. And not in a negative way, but in a way we're just thinking, oh, that's okay. I don't need to know. Everything's fine. We're all interconnected. It's going to be fine. So that's sort of, it's not too complicated. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing, Terry. Yeah, we've all heard lots of stories about the road. It's amazing how it gets under our skin. Driving. Yeah, Anthony?
Hi, yes. Could you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So my question is regarding the unwholesome. I wanted to know if you can apply it to the aggregate, and how our conditioning kind of like makes it tougher, or because I feel like at times, like I have the not the knowledge, but the understanding of, but somehow I think that subtly my mind gets kind of like where it plays tricks on me, to where I don't see the suffering that is going to be caused in the short term, or long term, both,
Yeah. Yes. And we see this a lot, of course, in ourselves and in other people. There was a woman who was talking to me on the phone today. She's actually living on the other side of the world. So you don't know her. And she was saying that she's really starting to understand her husband. because he's a very good person and he really wants to do things in a good way. And where she lives, she feels that a lot of the in the marriages, a lot of times the husbands are very controlling in her culture. So here's an example of, we learn in our culture how to behave in certain ways, and that's encouraged. And I've even, just as a bit of an aside, I've even seen this like in corporate culture. Like for a while, I worked for a company where the leadership at the top was dishonest to some degree. They would lie to customers, and they encouraged that kind of behavior in their employees. And it was amazing to me to see how much people working there, how that side of them would come out. And, it's like when we're in an organization, you can feel a kind of personality there, or in your school that you went to, or, whatever. And we can easily kind of see some aspect of ourself coming out and matching that, unless we're really careful and mindful. So she was talking about her husband, and he's really not that way. He's not controlling and dominating in their relationship. But she knows that his father was that way. And she said when he gets tired, stressed, then something will come out. He'll say something, and he really tries not to do it. So this is the kind of thing where, this is pretty deeply embedded. And even when we want to be different, sometimes it doesn't go that way. And like you said, we're not thinking at that time about the damage it's going to cause, the problems it's going to have. Even in our own mind, it's like, oh man, why did I act like that? I don't like myself when I act like that, or something of that nature. And I think it's really helpful to be forgiving of each other, that she could see that it's under certain conditions, and that he doesn't do anything really harmful. It's not like I used to work on the hotline for battered women's organization. And of course, there are horrible things that happen. And it's not like you ever want to put yourself in kind of harm's way and see, oh, that's all right. So there are certain things that are just not okay. And we need to get away from them. But if we can, and that's complicated. But in this case, it's not like that. It's more, like a unskillful comment or something. And so, this is definitely what we're dealing with, all of us. And we can even, sometimes something can come up in us that we didn't even realize was there. Maybe some kind of old trauma that is still, kind of still lurking or lingering in our system. And to recognize that it's okay. It's okay to feel what we feel, get a handle on it as soon as we can, backtrack and do the best we can to begin to form a new response, a new reaction. And to realize that we often have a lot more control than we think, I might have told this story last month. Ajahn Jayasaro, who's British monk in Thailand, he was giving a talk about anger to the monastics at the monastery. And he said, you feel like anger is just kind of automatic. It comes up so fast. But he said, actually, there's a moment, you do have choice. And there's a moment where you decide to go with it. And just hearing that helped me to have more interest and ability to unpack or bring more space between, feeling something or having the sensory input and then dealing with the feeling that was arising before there would be some response. And so, this is, it really helps to meditate It helps us to have more control over our mind and slow things down. It helps to have mindfulness as much as we can through the day so that we have, we're aware of what we're feeling, what we're thinking. And then as we practice patterns, like, trying to extract ourselves from the situation so that we can deal with our emotions. One time I knew of a couple where the husband would say, okay, I'm going to step away and I'll be back in 20 minutes. And actually, that's a very mature response. You're having these strong feelings and you're about to go some direction you don't want to go. And you're going to okay. And you could even to be able to say, I will be back in 20 minutes. It doesn't leave the other person completely wondering what's going on. There's some reassurance there. And, we can develop these kinds of mechanisms, and the more we work with what we feel, and then take the time after something goes on that we would rather have go differently, to really take the time with how it feels, really take the time with letting that emotion appear in the body and working with it as it is presenting itself in the body, so that we can give it a chance to kind of sift out, and give ourselves a chance to see that we don't have to be pushed around by such things. We don't have to be pushed around by the feeling. We can be present with the feeling and the feeling will go away. It takes some time. If something like anger shows up, there's chemicals flushing through the system. We have to let that all settle. Yes, Anthony?
I really like the 5 aggregates, because it breaks everything. It breaks it down to what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
And my question to you is, when we get the willpower or whatnot to, what you were discussing earlier,
Mm-hmm.
where in those 5 aggregates do we steer the other way? Would it? Because I know that.
Okay, and it depends a little on how we define the aggregates. So first I'll say, before I forget, that I just did a series on the 5 aggregates recently, and it's on our YouTube channel for Corona Buddhist Vihara. So you might find it interesting, because we had some good discussions. People brought up some interesting points, because, looking at perception, for example. So, we have contact. If you look, this is partly coming from the chain of dependent origination, but it's also, observable in all our experience. We hear, see, taste, touch, smell, or think something, and we're making sense of it. The sense consciousness is there, and immediately there's feeling. And we can't stop that part, because the feeling just comes up. That's old karma. That's coming from our conditioning. And also perception. So I really, recognize, not only are we, perceiving something, then, there's and of course the sense consciousness is there, making sense of this, identifying this thing, and the perception is there. I don't just think of it only as the simple act of perceiving, but I think about, and if you want to toss the patterns that we have, the perceptions we have of ourselves, the perceptions we have of other people, the perceptions we have of someone who's tall, short, fat, thin, black, white, brown, red, whatever. We have perceptions about doctors and lawyers and farmers and cattle drivers and plumbers and whatever. You think of anything, and we've got a whole bunch of perceptions around it. Someone can have a look on their face, and we perceive it as negative or positive, or has something related to me, or they've got an attitude about me, or, these kinds of things are built up from our experience. A lot of it we've learned from watching other people, like our parents or whoever was around, that we got conditioned, some of that conditioning. And frankly, I'm convinced that a lot of it comes from past life experience. We come in with attitudes, we come in with likes and dislikes, we come in with propensities. And so all of that's happening. And we have to begin to be the astute observer of all that. And the more we reflect upon, why do I have this? Do I have this perception? Is it true? Why am I having this particular story that comes up when I see this other car, that driver, they're driving a Tesla or they're driving a Volkswagen, and I've got a different perception, it's like, why is that? And what am I doing with it? And, the more we can unpack, like you're saying, I think the more we can unpack this. So really, whether we put these things in the category of the khanda of perception or sankhara, I don't know how much practical difference it makes, but it can help us think of these are pieces that come together that kind of construct a certain reaction, a certain way of thinking, and increasing a certain way of feeling. So there's that initial feeling that we don't have the ability to stop because it's already ignited immediately. But then whatever we think brings up more feeling. We can really deepen a felt sense. We can really deepen an anger or affection or whatever by our thinking. So that's the sankhara, and it plays into the feeling. And then you've got more feeling and you've got more perceptions arising, and it kind of snowballs unless we put some gaps in there. And really, it's, Terry was really describing it earlier too. And, we really put in a wedge of awareness. And then, some evaluation. This is where the wisdom faculty comes in. Is this leading upwards? Or is this leading downwards? And we can tell by how it feels. If this is opening my heart and making more loving kindness arise and compassion, if more wisdom arises of the Dhamma, this is a good direction. But if this is closing me down, making me more afraid, making me more angry or greedy or, whatever, confused, we're going in the wrong direction. So yeah, it's a great way to use the aggregates.
But I think in the moment of that, when your mind gets hijacked, I think it would be the lack of awareness, right, in that moment.
Yes. I mean, there's the part that you can't stop, but if you don't have the awareness to catch it where you can, then it's going to just keep rolling. And the ability to catch it earlier is something we develop. We're developing the sensitivity, the awareness, the ability to slow things down. And then we're able to catch it sooner. We can even recruit our best friend or our partner to remind us when they see it start happening in a kind way. You can have the code, to really support each other. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, let's take a break. Oh yeah, there's all this feeling here. Oh, yeah. I mean, do any of you hear your father's voice or your mother's voice coming out of your mouth with some way of talking? Or, I mean, not to blame the parents for everything, because God knows what they went through, but just we so easily just follow the conditioning we have, and we can catch ourselves. I'm sorry, Anne, did you have something you wanted to say?
So I was going to say something, but I don't know how many hands you have raised or how many other people are.
I think you're the only one, my dear.
Okay, so I think it's in the moment. We were talking about that in the moment. So I had an experience today where and so I'd have to say I picked up a lot of positive changes. Your second question, but today, we're downsizing in this house, and so there was a box that was essentially a drawer out of my husband's possessions, and I go, okay, today this is the day. Maybe you can do this. Well, I was watching him do this, and I go, this is going nowhere. Is just pulling things out of this box and putting them on the table. So. And my impatience was rising, and I was getting frustrated. And then I thought, okay, he actually doesn't really know. He doesn't have the skills to do this. This is not his forte. His forte is hanging on to things. I mean, that's a little overstatement. So I go, okay, how about if you don't just take him out of the box and put him on the table. How about if this is recycling, this is trash, this is your treasure box. And I produced this small box for him. And I said, these are for your treasures. Anyway, it was a successful operation, but I could easily have gone into, look, there's nothing there important. Let's just get rid of it. And I caught myself. And so patience is a quality that I think I have significantly improved on this with the Dharma. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yes, I think that's true of me too. I'm much more patient than I was in the past. And yeah, that's great. I mean, when we've been together with someone for a very long time, we have these patterns we have shared sankhara. We've developed this whole complex of calcified coral that we've got.
This is the way you behave, and this is the way I behave, and we repeat what isn't necessarily the most constructive pattern. So it's find the way out of that and anticipate it. So yes,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, good on you. That's great. We have about 4 more minutes if anybody wants to ask another question or make a comment, or I guess I should also show you what's up for next month. So I'm suggesting that you find 2 items in that list in the Effacement Sutta and really apply yourself to it. And if it's not in there, if they're not in there and you have your own version of one, and I noticed that resentment is one of the translations that Venerable Nyanamoli used, but it's not in Bhante Sujato's list. So it also depends on how they translate the Pali. So find the word or words that really describes what you want to change, and see if you can work with it in those sort of 5 steps, or most of the work is in that one where you're avoiding it by the smooth path and seeing what that antidote really is. And so that's the first one. And then increase any other practice that you do this month that cultivates good. And I gave some examples like listening to Dhamma talks, or reading Dhamma books, reading suttas, active service, and maybe increasing your meditation time a little, or including a new devotional practice, something that stimulates your practice, your development of good. And then I've given 3 sutta references to talk about purification of mind. So that's what we're going to talk about next time, of course, purifying the mind. And there are lots of possibilities in the Sutta Pitaka, but I picked these 3 from the Anguttara Nikaya. And if there's any that you find on your own in the suttas that are talking about purification of mind, I'd be happy for you to bring them next time and we can talk about them. So I think, yes, Anthony?
Can I please get that website? You mentioned that you had the Dhamma talks.
Yes, the suttas are at, let me see if I can, yeah.
No, the ones you mentioned about you just recently did about the aggregate.
Oh, okay. Yes, not suttacentral.net, but it's the Karuna Buddhist Vihara YouTube. So it's our YouTube channel for Karuna Buddhist Vihara. Yeah. All right. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for your practice and your attention. And I hope you have a really great month. It seems like the months are flying by for me. I don't know how that is for you, but before you know it, we'll be here again. And thank you, Rob, for all your support and help to create these programs. So take care, everyone.